to the Boropolis podcast. It's been a while, but we are back as usual. And of course, as always, I am joined with Nathan because it's been what seemingly feels like probably a month, when in reality it's just over a week. I think the fact that we did the last podcast so quickly after Chelsea is probably a blessing in disguise, really. The fact we had a little bit of time to get ourselves over that has meant, that there's been the end of the transfer window since our last episode, and of course the Sunderland game as well. So Nathan, before we delve into all of that and almost rewind a little bit and go back to when that transfer window was still open, how has your weekend been? Of course, always a little bit different when we play on a Sunday, which I must say I really do hate.
Yeah, it was a strange one, to be fair. It feels like a while, as you said, since we've done a podcast, and a lot's happened since then. Obviously, we had that free weekend the weekend before, and I still did get a match in. I actually travelled to Milan and watched AC Milan instead, which was a decent experience. And then on the day before our game, I went to go and watch the Mighty Imps at Burton Albion. So yeah, was really pleased to see them get a win and see Mustafa Carriol get a run out for Burton as well. So yeah, other than me traveling around to different grounds around the world, yeah, not so bad. But a little bit disorientating, the fact that it's a 12 o'clock kickoff on a Sunday. It's a proper horrible time. And yeah, I wasn't necessarily looking forward to the game or feeling any type of emotion despite it being Sunderland up until probably an hour before kickoff, really.
Yeah, it's a strange one, and as you say, I think with it being 12, you almost sort of wake up from the night before and think, got to go to the match, and there's a chance that they might get a positive result. And it's always worse, obviously, playing against them lot. To which I should say, I don't know if you saw the tweet yesterday, but Dan Ragusa, who is the social media man for BBC T, he's put out a post, a match day post saying Borough versus them lot. And it got a lot of bites from Sunderland fans. So Dan, if you're listening, fair play, because I did find that very funny. But yeah, before we talk about Sunderland, we have got to rewind, as I said, and go back to the end of the transfer window. Of course, at the time of recording our last podcast, we both pretty much had said in the previous episode we felt it was a matter of time before Morgan Rogers went. I think at that stage there'd been a second bid rejected. There was obviously a third, and then eventually, as we both said, the deal was struck. In the end, I mean, there was all sorts of varying reports, but I think the general sort of consensus was that it was £10 million up front with a potential to reach 15. Now, obviously, there was some sort of hysteria, I guess, when David Ornstein said that it was 8 with 7 million add-ons. And I think everyone sort of probably just went with John Percy because it seemed like a little bit more upfront for us. But I guess you also have to factor in that Manchester City had a 25% sell-on clause, which had previously been reported as 20. Listen, we've sort of spoken about Rodgers in previous episodes and how we felt about the interest and whether it would be a good move or not. In the end, I think, just echoing what we've previously said, it ended up being an offer that Middlesbrough couldn't really refuse. And obviously at that time as well, you were hoping that some of that money may well have been reinvested. Obviously, we can talk about the disappointment of not bringing in a forward to replace him, or at least a striker to add to our attacking ranks. But just sort of going over Rodgers and the fact that it was confirmed, what was your thoughts when that was finally done and dusted? And obviously he becomes an Aston Villa player and a Premier League player as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where you see the links initially and where they come from. And obviously we know that Ornstein and Fabrizio Romano are as reliable as it comes when it comes to football transfers. And seeing the club that obviously he's gone to, Aston Villa, being the team linked, I'd sort of resigned myself immediately to the fact that he was gone. Um, 2 weeks before it even happened. I knew that it was happening. So the fact that it dragged all the way to deadline day, just I wasn't bothered really. I think, look, the boy's got a bright future ahead of him, um, and it'll be interesting to see now as a Borough fan with interest in him to see how far he goes and if he even gets a game for them in the second half of this season. Obviously, he came off the bench for them the other night, played 10 minutes, despite them being 4-0 up at half time and it being a really good opportunity to just bring him on. Best of luck to him, in all fairness. Done well for us, scored our last goal before the weekend as well with that goal at Chelsea. Maybe, as we joked, added a couple of pennies on his transfer fee. But yeah, best of luck to him.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't want to talk about him too long. As I say, if you really are desperate to hear our thoughts on Morgan Rogers, we kind of discussed the interest as a whole and whether it was a good idea to let him go or not in previous episodes, to be honest, because it did end up, as you say, dragging on for that long. Obviously, there was another departure, and that was sort of, I guess, one of the main talking points of deadline day because everyone knew Rodgers had already gone. Callum Kavanagh joined Bradford permanently. A little bit of a shock, I guess, because he'd had a pretty good record for the 23s and had been in and around the first team, albeit, yes, a lot of injuries had caused sort of that situation. But I was expecting more of a loan, sort of one last roll of the dice in terms of seeing whether he could cut it. We obviously saw him go out on loan last season, and I think he'd only scored maybe one or two goals and didn't really sort of make the impact that you kind of want a player of that age to be making a team in a lower division. But yeah, I mean, your thoughts on that, because there was sort of a degree of anger I saw personally on social media, and it did shock me because I think just like when a player gets injured, everyone almost in the mind that player instantly becomes a better player because you haven't seen him for that amount of time. And also similarly, when an academy player's done okay in the youth leagues and then is sort of on the fringes, they sort of become the answer, even though they may not. And to be honest, I must say, as a club, we have a fairly okay record of getting rid of young players at the right time, and it hasn't really caught us on the arse too much. I'm crossing my fingers that that remains the case. But yeah, for me, I'm just trusting Michael Carrick's judgment on this because with the amount of injuries we've had up top, if he really thought that Callum Kavanagh was going to be the answer to our problems up front, I think he would have got more of an involvement than what he has done.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think it was probably an interesting one. Obviously, we'd seen the photo of him in Bradford's training gear and sort of assumed that it would be a loan deal. But it's a funny one. He's been out on loan to two League Two clubs in the past, in Harrogate and then Newport, and I think he had a handful of goals in both of his loan spells between them. Um, so look, he hasn't pulled up any trees in the fourth tier, and he hasn't had a look in at Borough. Obviously, he came off the bench against Port Vale in the League Cup a couple of months ago. But yeah, I think it's probably the best for his development, really, to just let him go out, play regular football, get himself a contract there, secure his future correctly there. And yeah, hopefully he'll get a run in their side. But yeah, I think we'll probably get on to the subject of strikers a little bit later when we discuss Sunderland, um, about players in our ranks that probably uh, sort of following along that same path as Callum Kavanagh as well.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, one more departure on deadline day. Brian Belongo did join Ebbsfleet on loan. Somewhat of a shock, I guess, the fact it probably wasn't a team higher up the pyramid. Quite strangely enough, I think Jordan Ibe, a sort of failed wonder kid, actually come on for Ebbsfleet at the weekend. So they're going to be playing together. But yeah, a strange one. I thought he'd probably go to a League Two team. I think it's his first loan spell since he's been at the club, and he's sort of been in and around the team, or the squad, I should say, for a while now, without really sort of, breaking into the team, I guess. But yeah, first loan spell, so I guess we can just reserve judgment a little bit and see how he gets along, and hopefully he does well, because Belongo was a player that we brought in similarly to the likes of Jed Spence and Isaiah Jones from our sort of scouting network in London. I think he had a trial at Chelsea, and then we picked him up, and he, after a trial, signed for the club. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he gets on at National League level. And then, of course, Nathan, we did have some incoming transfer news, sort of going back again, really, because it had been confirmed almost out the blue, really, before deadline day. And that was, of course, the addition of Luke Thomas from Leicester on loan. His loan spell with Sheffield United was cut short, and he joins us for the remainder of the season. We should say that this signing pretty much seemingly has been made because Bangura is going to be out for a while. And it's disappointing, isn't it? Because like injuries throughout this season, and I really don't want to talk about injuries anymore, because I feel like it's taken up about 50% of our podcast this year. But when you have a few back, seemingly the way things are going for Middlesbrough at the moment is, well, that balances itself out, because someone else will pick up a knock and they'll be out for 6 to 8 weeks, or you won't see them again for another few months. So yeah, Luke Thomas coming in to challenge Lucas Engel in that left back spot. Sheffield United fans weren't overly sort of complimentary about his performances. But of course, comes with a decent pedigree, still relatively young, has played the majority of his football at a Premier League side. And yeah, I think from what I've read and from what I've seen of him in previous years, probably more of an attacking option from left back, as opposed to Lucas Engel, who is slightly more, I guess, conservative in the way that he plays that role.
Yeah, I think it's a decent signing as a short term sort of stopgap. Obviously, we wouldn't have signed him had Bangura been fit. There'd have been no need to. But it's important to have cover in every position, and to get a player like Luke Thomas in there that's a bit different to Engel, as you mentioned, probably a little bit more attacking than Engel. A player that's played most of his career in the Premier League. I think he played something like 90 games in the Premier League, um, which for I think he's only 22. For a 22-year-old, that's a pretty good feat, really. And yes, there have been a couple of comments from Leicester fans and Sheffield United fans about his ability, and obviously they've only seen him play in the Premier League, where I mean the level is quite ridiculous. I mean, Sheffield United got 5-0 by Aston Villa at the weekend. Um, so yeah, the level's frightening. And hopefully Luke Thomas will find it a little bit more comfortable at championship level, find his feet, and hopefully get his confidence back. It can't be great getting beat 5-0 at home every week, 8-0 by the Geordies as well. So yeah, it can't be good. Playing for a side like that that's getting tonked every week. So yeah, hopefully he gets his confidence back in a Borough side that are going relatively well in the championship.
Yeah, and of course, it's a good point that you make. Obviously, as a defender, especially in a team of Sheffield United standards at the moment, it can't be good for confidence. But from a few sort of opinions of Sheffield United fans via social media that I did pick up on, they did say he was seeming more so like somewhat of a luxury player in terms of a left back, where he will offer you something going forward, but perhaps, as the saying goes of a modern day fullback, perhaps his strengths lie more in attacking rather than defending. But I guess when you say, and what you've mentioned, if you drop him into a team like Middlesbrough, we saw the success that a certain Ryan Giles had last season in a role which allowed him to attack more, and in a team that usually retains possession more often than not. So yeah, it seems like a good fit. And again, age-wise and even his contract situation, I think Leicester have an option to extend his contract by one more year. But if they don't, he's out of contract at the end of this season. So even if we did have to pay a fee and they activate that option and he succeeds here, I would assume it would be fairly minimal. So again, I guess sort of evidence of that transfer strategy coming through again. And obviously, as we've alluded to earlier in the podcast, transfer strategy is really a hot topic, I guess, before we get on to Sunderland. Disappointment that we didn't bring in a striker or at least a forward player on deadline day. Of course, there was the very late links to Manuel Benson, a player that didn't even end up going anywhere on loan. Obviously, we'd seen the Diallo links, and I guess with Marcus Forss being back, even we'd mentioned that there could be a spot for a right winger, and then see obviously Forss go more central. We didn't bring in a recognised number 9 either. And I guess from what I've read, I'm sure you've seen it as well, and for those listening to the podcast, you very much are sort of one side of the fence or another on the way we've gone about this, because some people have said, well, we've sold Rodgers, who would, well, up until the point he was sold, being the highest contributing player in terms of goals and assists. Yes, okay, some of those were in the Carabao Cup, but regardless, they were goals and assists still. And yeah, people said, well, we've sold that player, we haven't reinvested the money. This way that the club are going about things will only sort of put us in a position where we've always got to sell our best players and we'll never get out of the division, and that's that. Obviously, there's another side of the fence or another side of the coin where you look at it as though this is an offer that Middlesbrough couldn't refuse. Yes, it is frustrating that we didn't sort of use any of that money, but also being mindful that this recruitment team aren't just going to go and waste money like Middlesbrough have done previously. They are going to buy players in the hope that they can basically flip them, as they did with Morgan Rodgers, for more money, and gradually, by using that process, get the squad to a level where basically, like you see with Brentford or Brighton, that they have got so many good players that occasionally or during a window, probably one or two of those may get picked up, but then you just replace them and the process starts again almost. I can see both sides of this, Nathan, because at the end of the day, we're fans. I would be lying if I say I wasn't frustrated on deadline day, because as a fan, I want success quickly. But I'm also mindful enough to know what the club are trying to do. I mean, where do you stand on this? Because I can see both sides to the argument. People pay a lot of money to go to games and want to see Middlesbrough score goals. And it's so obvious that we needed a striker. But then also there's accounts which show we can't afford to just go and spend 6 million on a journeyman striker.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm quite similar to you in the way that obviously you want success fast, but you also sort of on the other side of things. I've grown to become quite a level-headed fan in understanding that we are a championship club. We haven't got a budget like Leicester or Southampton, who are in the division with us this year, that can just go out and just, well, I mean, look at the state of Leicester's squad, Southampton's squad. Southampton just signed David Brooks on loan on deadline day, who would probably be on Bournemouth's fringes of getting in their side. Their fans are quite frustrated that he's gone out there. So it just goes to show the level of quality that's in the division. Um, but yeah, we haven't got parachute payments. So we've got to work a little bit differently to the teams at the top of the division. Obviously, Ipswich have built a squad um, that have seen a lot of success in League One and have carried on that momentum into this division. And fair play to them, but it'll only be a matter of time until one player or two players get picked out that squad, and it'll be up to them to try and replace them. And they'll be in a relatively similar position to what we were in last summer when they lose a couple of players. But yeah, as mentioned, we want success fast. And when you look around at the business that a couple of other sides in and around us in the table, and you see Hull's ambition to create a championship super team of attackers and just go all out attack, sign Ryan Giles, sign loads of wingers as well that want to go down the outside. Doesn't necessarily make too much sense to me, but we'll see where they go. They'll have to rebuild in the summer if they don't go anywhere. It's a very sort of short-term move from their chairman. It's very all or nothing. I think. Don't necessarily know the ins and outs of their financials, but they've got a squad full of loan players that are all going back to the parent clubs in the summer, and seen a couple of comments saying, "Oh well, we've got Seri and Tufan on our books." All right, well, they're not quite Tyler Morton or Fabio Carvalho, so it just eliminates that point. But yeah, when you see clubs signing players of a certain caliber, there is that little bit of sort of jealousy, and you look at it and think, well, why aren't we in for that player? But you just have to be level-headed. We did that last summer, uh, sort of 2022 summer. Signed Giles on loan, and then Mowat, Stefan, and then in the January, obviously it's a different window and it's sort of easier to sign players on loan in the January, but you get Archer and Ramsey, you get to the end of the season, they all go. Your best player from the season in Akpom was there with 1 year left on his deal and at an age where he could sort of turn and decline. So you don't know. We spoke about that in the summer anyway, and we had to rebuild, and we've gone for a little bit of a different approach this time, which is we've signed a load of players that are certainly for the future. Rodgers was bought with a look to the future in terms of developing him, and his trajectory has probably exceeded the club's expectations as well. And they've flipped him for 15 million quid. You've got Vandenberg there, who was promised when he came to us, despite being linked to European sides, that if he came here, he'd get game time. And he's been given that. He's proven his worth. And I'm in no doubt that he'll probably be flipped for a similar fee, if not more, in the summer or next season, probably. Um, and I think this season was always going to be a season of bedding these boys in to the way that we want to play, the culture around the football club, the area, and moving young players to the north of England, getting them set up, getting them settled, and making them comfortable, all with an aim to sort of kick on next season, probably. I think from the outside, just as a fan, I don't know if this is the way that people in business think, but looking at sort of the league this year and seeing how strong it was always going to be with Leicester, Southampton, and Leeds coming down, it was always going to be a ridiculous task, especially when you looked at when that summer window closed and they'd all retained players like Dewsbury Hall, Reuter, Somerville, and you think, well, what are we up against here? And then you look at next season and you think, well, the top of League One, yeah, okay, there's a lot of sides that are in there that are competing and all relatively similar around each other in terms of the points total. Not like last season where three sides absolutely romped it and we're all competing with each other. So I'm not too concerned about a possible Ipswich coming up from League One next year. And the teams that are coming down, I mean, Sheffield United, it'll be interesting to see what goes on there, whether Wilder stays or not. Um, they'll obviously lose a couple of players and have to rebuild. Burnley, be interesting to see if Company stays.
I think they're the best placed currently to
They
probably
are,
do what
yeah,
they twice now.
yeah, I'd agree with you there, but it'll be interesting to see if a couple of the young lads that they've signed from abroad just don't fancy playing in the Championship. Obviously, they'll have been tempted over by the top flight, so it'll be interesting to see what goes on there. And then that last place, which will probably be taken up by one of Luton, Everton, maybe Forest. It'll depend. It'll depend on this points deduction. My point is that for Middlesbrough, bedding these players in this season and going for it next season. But yes, it is a little bit frustrating looking at the position we're in. Only a couple of points sort of splitting us from, I don't know, Hull, who have shown a lot of ambition. Um, and they've signed five players and we've signed a couple of players that haven't necessarily improved us. We're just sort of simmering along at the same level. Um, but yeah, we've certainly got a little bit of coin in the bank to hopefully go and get a proper number nine or two in the summer. And yeah, I think it's just a case of, I know it's cliche, but just trust the process.
Yeah, yeah. And do you know what? I do agree with you, but I think, to be honest, and this is just my personal opinion, our inability to bring in a forward or bringing Benson, for example, has toned my expectations for the remainder of this season right down. And as a fan, it is frustrating. I completely agree with those that are frustrated that we didn't manage that. But even against Sunderland and the disappointment of that, and, you know, of course, football fans in general are going to be annoyed by results in the heat of the moment. I completely agree with that. But had we have, done a Hull and then you drop points a few times and start to think, well, we've spent all this money and we're not getting immediate results, I'd almost have been more annoyed. And I think we've still got some really good players. I think we'll probably be around or within touching distance of the playoffs for the remainder of the season. I don't think we'll bridge that gap and get into the playoffs. I must admit, I think it may sound dramatic, but the lack of that number nine or sort of cutting edge or X factor player not being brought in probably just rules out the playoffs for me now, seeing, as well as the quality that other teams around us have brought in and the existing quality that they already had. But yeah, it's a weird one because I'm frustrated, but I've also almost accepted it, and I feel a little bit more at peace with the fact that I can see what we're doing because of the fact, and it is a positive that we've done this. The fact that we didn't just go out and rush and buy. I don't know. We could have ended up getting Kiefer Moore in on loan, and he might go and score 10, 15 for Ipswich for the remainder of the season, and everyone will go, well, fair play. They've done the deal. They're covering however much of his wages, probably 80%, the majority of them. And people will say, well, why didn't Middlesbrough do that? But we've also seen players come in with high loan fees, high wages, at not a very good age. And then you, as you've said, you restrict yourselves for the summer and you end up being in a situation where you're back to square one. And the fact that we didn't panic and the fact that we didn't go and overpay for someone, for me, shows more of a clear sign of progress and a clear strategy from the recruitment team than perhaps actually some of the signings that we've made. I know that might sound a little bit silly, but it works both ways in terms of player trading. And yeah, as I say, I think that's probably made my mind up a little bit and lowered expectations, even though it's frustrating. But I think that's where we're at. And I think that leads us quite nicely onto yesterday, to be honest. Obviously, in the end, a disappointment on the day. 1-1 Nathan. It was a massive opportunity, not just because it was Sunderland, but because of the way that the league currently is at the moment. Had we have managed to hold on for all 3 points, it would have put us in a really healthy position, actually, with games in hand on quite a few teams in and around us. But just in general, of course, we'll go more in depth into the game. But I guess with what you were saying earlier about not being sort of too nervous up until kickoff, did, I guess, the end of the transfer window and what we've just discussed have any impact in the way you were feeling going into the game yesterday?
Uh, possibly, possibly a little bit with injury news as well. Just because without Jones, we're pretty much stinking up front for pace. We haven't got any quick players in that forward line without Jones or Lath. And it is a little bit frustrating to watch, especially when you see Sunderland. Okay, I'm going to just sort of jump into the second half and say about Roberts as well, but Roberts and Clark on the wings are just a little bit more scary to watch, I suppose, where they're actually going to drive our play, whereas our players will get the ball. And I know it's the way that we play, but it's more about incisive passes rather than just trying to get at a player and kill them.
Without Morgan Rogers, we now lack any ball carrier, don't we?
Yeah, yeah, we do.
I guess apart from Jones, of course, but given that he was injured yesterday.
Yeah, so I was a little bit sort of interested to see what we do with the team. Um, Pleased with the back line, sort of pleased with the midfield. Was a bit sort of not confused, but interested to see what would go on with Hackney playing further forward. I'm not necessarily a massive fan of it. I know it worked for 2 games last season, but otherwise, not really. Um, he's better in that midfield too. Um, but in terms of forward options, it goes to show the confidence in Coburn, who didn't start yesterday, and he opts for Greenwood instead up front. Perhaps that was because of the ability to catch Sunderland out in behind them, and any sort of pace would have killed Ballard and '09, 2 cart horses. So yeah, a little bit not underwhelmed with the starting 11, but you're just imagining if we had like a Benson in that side, obviously linked with him on deadline day, and you think it's just a little bit of what's the word? Just a bit of magic really that can come out of anywhere. I'm failing to see any player in that front line that can produce just a little bit of something out of nothing. And watching Benson last year, all of a sudden he just launched one from 30 yards in the top corner, right in the top corner as well, and
I
he'd
think,
do it ten
to
times as
be
easy.
honest, and he did it twice against us, didn't he?
Yeah,
I think Finn Azaz is probably the player that we were hoping and are still hoping is going to be that type of player. Even McGree, who obviously we should say will be coming back from the Asia Cup now, which is going to be a bonus, isn't really that type of player. Um, but yeah, I think people are hoping that Finn Azaz is going to be that man, and at the moment hasn't quite been that. There's been a few passes, in as you say, incisive passes that he's played, and moments where you think, there's definitely something there. But on the whole, probably hasn't really managed to impact games as much as what we'd hoped he might immediately. And of course, Morgan Rogers wasn't doing that immediately. And look what's happened with his Middlesbrough career. You've got to give these types of players time. But I do see what you mean in terms of that X factor, in terms of that moment of brilliance. We do. You look at that front line now, and even with all of our players fit, even with Latilaf being available, even with Jones being available, there's probably not that real sort of star quality in that forward line.
yeah, and obviously you're looking and seeing their side, and you see Clark. I mean, he's the star man, isn't he? Although he doesn't necessarily always perform against us. You are worried that he will turn up eventually. And yesterday, I suppose, was probably his best performance against us. Over his Leeds and Sunderland careers. But yeah, it was sort of a strange one. Wanted to see how we'd start. And actually, I thought that we were better in the first half, strangely enough. When they had the ball in their half,
Yeah,
we were better. We'd just take the ball off them, and all of a sudden, if you get them turned, we'd create opportunities. Obviously, we play that ball down the side. Greenwood just about gets to it. Uh, Test Patterson comes straight out, and on the replay that I've seen on Sky, having watched it back, Azaz just isn't aware that he has nobody anywhere near him.
he's
He
got
should
so much time to take a touch.
so much time. Just yeah, stay composed, take a touch, and pass it into the back of the net. But he goes first time, blaze it over the bar. It's a massive chance. But the better chances of the first half were actually Sunderland's. Obviously, Bar had that chance down the right hand side where I mean he should just cut it back, but he just passes it out of play. And then obviously the main one, which just how on earth has Bar not scored? I know all credit to Rav that he's on the line, but Bar's literally just passed it into him. Um, I don't know how he's not scored, but we'll take it. The carve does open. Clark just sort of playing with Glover and our defence really. On Sky, they actually said he should have scored. Don't know what they're seeing. He's made the correct choice to pass that.
Yeah, it
Uh,
was incredibly narrow, the angle, if he'd opted for a shot. And if he had opted for a shot and missed, then it's the type of situation where a commentator goes, oh, well, he should have squared it.
yeah, and squares it. Just I don't know. He's not scored, but all credit to Rav. He gets himself in a good position, blocks that shot on the line. It looked like a funny one from where we sat because there was a couple of bodies in the way, and it looked like he'd sort of stopped it on the line and was scrambling it away, but I think it just was all in one movement. Um, But yeah, we survived. Um, and yeah, we didn't necessarily create a whole lot. Other than that, as our chance in the first half, there was the possibility of us having a penalty on Sky as well. And I think if it's VAR, I think it does get given.
I thought
Um,
in the stadium. I'm
yeah,
not.
gets chipped up onto Hjelda's arm. And I mean, I'm not even going to get into it, but the commentary on Sky is utterly pathetic. They said because it's touched his sleeve, it's not a pen.
I
So
don't even want to do it.
just,
I had enough of Luke O'Nien being on co-coms for me to realise that I should just not watch. Well, obviously, in this situation, I was in attendance at the game, but in future, I just mute the commentary whenever Middlesbrough plays Sunderland because there seems to be some sort of Don Goodman Sunderland loving. Yeah, I don't want to get into it because I'll just get angry.
yeah, but I did think that they probably edged it in the first half. Obviously happy to get in at 0-0, having seen them have one scrambled off the line. Um, but yeah, was sort of interested to see how the second half would go, and the reason why everyone saw it as such a massive opportunity missed was because they came out in the second half and they were crap, really. We battered them for most of the second half. Obviously, um, our goal comes from Greenwood chasing back, winning a free kick off Dan Neil. Probably could have gone either way. That actually, if you watch it back, Greenwood's the other side of the referee pulling Neil's shirt. But in fairness, he does well to sort of scoop the ball uh back but in Borough's favour, and Neil just grabs hold of him. So yeah, in that case, that instant it was a free kick to us. And look, the way we set this free kick up, I think it is pretty decent, but the execution was pretty awful. Um, Barlasser into Hackney. Hackney then bobbles the ball up at Greenwood. Greenwood can't get a proper shot away, which is then deflected sort of off a Sunderland player into the path of force. But for him, it's he does ridiculously well to get it under with a really good touch that sets him perfectly. And it couldn't have fallen to a better player this chance. I think pretty much if it was, I'm not going to over egg it too much, but I wouldn't have been anywhere near as confident uh, with a Borough player apart from Marcus Forss with this chance. But he just strikes it like he does every other chance he gets. So clean, so sweet, buries it in the corner. And Sky said it was a really well worked move.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure about that. I should say that actually I had Sam Greenwood to score or assist on my bet, which did end up losing, by the way, all £2.50 of it. And Paddy Power actually gave him the assist. So, you know what? Fair play. If that had meant that I'd won some money, then I would have been on here raving about the assist, which Sam definitely meant. But yeah, as you say, you don't want anyone else to have the ball in control in this Middlesbrough side apart from Marcus Forss in that situation. 9 times out of 10, he's going to hit the target, and a large amount of the time, he's probably going to hit the back of the net as well. We spoke about probably not that star quality, but in terms of just a natural finisher and goal scorer, Marcus Forss is exactly that. And it's just a real shame that Jones's injury has happened when it has happened, because I think even Michael Carrick is alluding to it now, to be honest, that everyone's just crying out for Marcus Forss to play central. He has all the attributes to be the striker that everyone's crying out for. We create enough chances for the most part, and Marcus Forss is a great finisher. So if this wasn't Middlesbrough, I'd say, well, as soon as Jones comes back, then I can't really say us losing many games, to be honest, because we'll just start sticking all them chances away. Obviously, it won't work like that, and it's not always as easy as I'm saying it is. But yeah, Marcus Forss, so glad he's back. I really hope to God that his little knock yesterday is just sort of precaution and it's nothing sort of anything worse than that because I can't bear with losing him for another 3 months or something like that. But yeah, terrific finish. The sooner he can play central, the better for Middlesbrough. And as well as Marcus Forss, I just want to say yesterday, in terms of you mentioned the pressing, and we looked more dangerous in the first half when Sunderland had the ball. A large part of that, and someone that played a big part in the goal as well, Sam Greenwood, for the first time, really used as a number 9, looked so much more comfortable there. I know we do play with 2 10s, the sort of inverted left of that 3 behind the striker is a 10 as well. But there is situations because he's out left, and even with McGree, where you've got to face up a defender at times, and that's just not Sam Greenwood's game. Sam Greenwood's game is making a nuisance of himself, his ball striking ability, his all-round effort and press. I thought, although he didn't score yesterday, one of his best games in Middlesbrough shirt. And if it is going to be Force on the right until Jones is back, then I've got absolutely no qualms with Sam Greenwood playing as that 9. Because to be honest, and I know you're going to feel very strongly about the man that replaced him in a somewhat of a shock given our opinions earlier on this season, but the game for me was I was about to say won and lost. We didn't lose, but the 2 points were dropped from the moment that Michael Carrick made those substitutions yesterday. And I know that Greenwood had somewhat of a tweak and Force went down as well. If that is the case, then I guess Carrick didn't really have any other option. But if we're judging this based off Carrick tactically tweaking it, and I've criticised him sometimes in the past for not doing these substitutions earlier, then it definitely impacted us negatively because as soon as Greenwood went off, we just seemed to fall 10 yards, and Sunderland just thought, well, we aren't even getting attacked yet. We can step forward and we can have a go ourselves, actually. And ultimately, that's where their goal comes from. Because up until that point, as you say, they'd offered nothing.
Yeah. The substitutions, I mean, my hope is that Force and Greenwood just both come off because they felt a little bit of cramp, or they were both just out on the feet. Greenwood especially. I mean, he worked his absolute socks off yesterday. Um, Pressing from the front all day, running in behind. He wasn't coming towards the ball a lot as he has done in the past. I suppose that depends on his position, but his runs in behind I thought were pretty good all day. I think sometimes, obviously, he was caught offside, sometimes rightly, sometimes wrongly as well. Um, but yeah, I thought he was really good in that number 9 position yesterday, and if he can replicate a couple more of those performances and get a couple of chances himself, then we might be on something from now until the end of the season. Obviously, he did have that chance himself, actually, that Engel played down the side for him. It was a little bit of a difficult chance, that one, on his left foot, where he had to sort of dink it slightly over Patterson's trailing leg, and he just knocked it wide. But yeah, obviously the changes were made with about 15 minutes to go. Triple substitution. Coburn, Silvera, and O'Brien. Um, and yeah, Barlasser had a pretty good game yesterday by all accounts. Came off. Force and Greenwood as well. And as you mentioned, we just didn't have anyone pressing for that last 15 minutes. And I don't necessarily know if it was us falling back in our own half or to give them a little bit of credit, but just realizing that we lacked any threat going forward then on, and they stepped up, knowing that we didn't have any pace in behind with Greenwood. Um, so yeah, I'd be interested to work that one out, whether it was us or them that made that sort of tweak in the way that the game was going. Um, but yeah, Coburn is probably the talking point. Obviously, we sort of stuck a lot by him. Um, it from sort of September time when he was in the side, and I'll still stand by it that he was a part in our turnaround from just being consistently beaten week upon week with Latte Lath just having chance after chance in behind pretty much every game, 1v1, and he'd either run it straight into the keeper's hands, twonk it 25 yards wide or over, or just fall over his own feet and nothing had happened. And then Coburn came into the side and he'd get you up the pitch, and he was probably what would be seen as a stopgap in the side until, I mean, you'd hope January, but he got injured, didn't he, in the international break? Didn't play in that Bristol City game in the first game back. We'd heard he had a hernia, and I don't know if he's had an operation. If he hasn't, fair enough, he might be struggling. But if he has, then I'm not being funny, but he's been brutal since November. Really, he doesn't offer us a whole lot at all. He's the sort of question marks around him 2 years ago when he was given a run in the side was, well, we'll loan him out to League One and he'll grow into his body, into his frame, because he's a big lad, and he'll become a little bit stronger, and then he'd be able to compete at this level. But despite his frame, I don't think he's strong enough at this level to be able to hold the ball up and bring players into play as much. He's certainly not quick. Um, Obviously, we've seen in previous games he didn't get any yesterday in those final 15 minutes because we just invited Sunderland on, I suppose. Um, but he had, I can't even remember the game, but he had just chance after chance in a first half of a game around the Christmas period and couldn't hit a barn door. Um, and it's a real shame because I do like him. But honestly, I think, as mentioned earlier with Calcav, but I think this is a lost cause. Colburn's 21 now. He's not necessary. Okay, he's still young, but he's not a 19-year-old kid. Um, like he was coming into the side a couple of years ago. He's played senior football for 3 years now. And I think, honestly, if we are a side that wants to be from next season competing in and around the top six of this division, then you need to pull the trigger and get some centre forwards in that suit this system a lot more because Coburn doesn't suit the system.
Yeah, for me, it's an interesting one, and I'm I probably disagree with you in parts of that. I do agree that he probably hasn't been up to scratch, or not probably, definitely hasn't been up to scratch for a number of weeks now. But the way I look at it is, I don't know this information for definite, but we know that from Carrick, he's being managed almost on a daily basis. We know what the injury is or the problem, which is a hernia. Um, he's been in squads of late and played games and then missed the squad the following game in a matter of days difference. And for me, that would point towards the fact that he is still suffering with a hernia, and he hasn't had the operation yet. Now, if that is the case, and that is somewhat speculation, I'm personally, that's the way I look at it, because of the drop in performances. Because even when he was being criticised earlier on this season, and I would agree with you, I'd still say at that point of the season, Josh Coburn, although he wasn't playing perfectly or scoring a consistent amount of goals, was offering us enough to warrant his place in the team. And I think, although, yes, you can get injections and make yourself available, with a problem like that, I just look at his performances of late and think there's basically no way that can't still be a recurring problem that hasn't been completely solved yet. Because, as you say, there has been a significant drop off. I think he looks a little bit uncomfortable, even in one of the previous games. I think it may have been the Chelsea first leg. He got into a position where he could cross the ball and he slipped, and you could see he was in serious discomfort. Now, if that is the case, regardless if he's having injections to play in these games and make himself available, there's still going to be discomfort there. You're still not going to play at any kind of potential. And I also think, in fairness to Josh Coburn, I know you said about, being a serious team in and around the division. I do somewhat agree with that. But also, let's not forget that the same problems around bringing in a recognised striker, someone that could be alongside Latilaf, who was new to the league and was a gamble in any case. We needed something else as well as that. And Josh Coburn was going to go out on loan. And for me, even still watching him now, I still think that he probably needs another year. And I'm certainly not writing him off. I know a lot of people already have. I've seen enough from him in previous games, and even his finishing at certain points, even when he first broke into the team, to think that, yes, we might not have, I know there's a bit of a joke about it on Twitter, we certainly don't have the next Alan Shearer on our hands. But I don't think Josh Coburn is a bad striker, and that he won't, even if it's not with Middlesbrough, he won't go on and have a decent career at probably higher end League One, maybe even in the Championship. I'm personally not at the stage where I'm willing to write him off yet. But I do think that this situation that we've ended up in, you sort of, even though there's that strategy in place, what we spoke about regards to transfers, it is a little bit of a mess. Because if he hasn't had that operation and he's still just making do and being monitored, then realistically we don't have a recognised striker currently. And that is a major issue for any team trying to get in and around the playoffs, whether you are trying to try a different strategy or not. That is a major problem. So, yeah, I imagine, and I hope that is the case, because if Coburn has had the operation, as you say, then there's just been a significant drop off. But I personally just don't think that is the case. And from things that have been mentioned to me and noises that you do hear, I do think it's the case that hasn't been done yet. So hopefully, with Latilaf back, with Jones back, depending on when they're available, it may provide an opportunity for him to have that done and have the rest that he needs and is required. But yeah, I don't want to sort of get drawn too much into speculation, because I guess we're talking about something that we aren't fully 100% is even the case in anyway. But yeah, I'm not ready to give up on him just yet. And I just hope that Latilaf's back soon or Jones is back soon, because then we look somewhat more of a team with cohesion and in our formation, as you say. Josh Coburn as a player, although he played his role this season, it's probably not a system that is really sort of or fits the type of player that he is too much, even though I'll back him up again and say he did a good job of deputising whilst Latilaf was out of the team earlier on this season.
Yeah, it just hasn't been an ideal scenario all this season, has it? Going into the season with two fit centre forwards. And for massive periods of time, you've had the summer signing like Erlath, who was going to be your designated number nine, out and unavailable for long periods at a time, where it's been, yeah, have a couple of months off injured, come back for 2 or 3 games, pull up again injured, have another 2 months off. It's just unbelievable. And then Coburn, as you mentioned, to be going out on loan and then having to shoulder the burden of being a side that was in the playoffs last season as their number nine. It must be difficult. And look, it isn't his fault, and I do feel sorry for him. Um, because as mentioned, he did do a terrific job um in that little run that we had. I did think that he played relatively well in that run. Um, but yeah, you said he may well still be injured. I mean, in the nicest way possible. I hope to God that he is, because if he's not, then there is actually no excuse. Um, but yeah, it's a real strange one, and yeah, he's probably just not or hasn't been ready to make the step up to playing in the championship week in, week out. Um, and I think even people will make the point, well, he was going on loan at Plymouth. Well, yeah, but they have Ryan Hardy as well, who scored a load of goals for them last year in League One, that will have been given the opportunity to lead the line for them. And he's doing just that at the minute, and he scores more goals than Coburn so far this season as their number nine. So yeah, um, I think that's enough on that little diversion. But yeah, obviously the substitutions were made on 75 minutes. We dropped deeper in our own half, invited them on, but actually the goal came from us attacking them. Coburn and Silvera getting in the way of each other. The ball just sort of rolls out to their left-hand side. Clark drops deep. Earling's had a nightmare here following him in. And seeing Clark about to play that ball inside, knowing that he's going to be on his bike and Earling's going to be running like he's stuck in the mud behind him, it was, yeah, I could tell it was coming. Yeah, ran Earling all the way up the line. Joe Bellingham makes a terrific run, in fairness. Brings Rav across, following him, creates the space for Rusin over the far side. Engels probably in the River Tees somewhere, nowhere to be seen. And yeah, another topic. Rusin gets the shot off. He's actually further out than I thought he was. I thought he was at least in the box, and he's not. He's about 20 yards out, and he's hit this shot. And yeah, it's bounced at that near post, gone through Glover's hand, and yeah, he's tucked it in. But the way in which it happened is a little bit infuriating. If that chance doesn't happen and they score the bar chance in the first half, fair game, but it's a goalkeeping mistake, and it cost you 3 points.
Yeah, yeah, it is frustrating. It's very frustrating, in fact. But yeah, it's a difficult one because I suppose in the situation that the goalkeepers are in, with Seni Dieng being close to being fit again, that mistake is probably going to cost Tom Glover his place in the team. And who knows, maybe Seni Dieng being back and being available again, Carrick may have thrown him back in. But I don't think up until really, even after conceding 6 at Chelsea, I don't think it would have been as cut and dried and we'd have sort of expected Dieng to come back into the team straight away when he was available again. Unfortunately for Tom Glover, I feel like that mistake may probably put the icing on the cake in terms of Seny Dieng, when available again, will come back into the team. And Tom Glover, for the most part, whilst deputising for Seny Dieng, has been very good. And I must say, after his early performances in the Cup this season, I was slightly alarmed about the prospect of him deputising. But credit to him, he's been very good. And, you know, Seny Dieng was also excellent at the beginning of the season. But I think it's probably a compliment to Tom Glover, the fact that, it wasn't such an obvious miss, really, for however many games it's been now. But yeah, I think as brutal and as cruel as it will be on Tom Glover, Seny Dieng will come back in because of that mistake. And it's, as you say, a mistake that has forced us to drop 2 points and lose out on what would have been a very, very valuable 3 points and win that would have put us in touch and distance of those playoff spots. And yeah, it's a game at the Riverside. Another hot topic at the moment, where at home our form has let us down again. And I guess that leads us quite nicely onto next weekend, because we return to the Riverside against a team who are in that pack, I guess, of 6 or 7 teams, probably one of the teams lower down in that pack that you wouldn't really expect to really make a charge for the playoffs. But they have beaten us once already this season. Of course, the Ashton Gate curse, as always. But yeah, they have improved. Is the general consensus amongst Bristol City fans since Liam Manning joined Bristol City. They've also, of course, added Scott Twine to their team since then. I mean, what are you sort of expecting from next week, both in terms of Bristol City and Middlesbrough? Because I imagine Carrick may slightly tweak things next week.
Well, in terms of us, I haven't got a Scooby-Doo what's going to happen, because one week we're like Barcelona and the next we're like, I don't even know,
Well,
Barn.
to be honest, we've got a full week of training, so I mean, 3 of them will probably have done the. I don't know. I was going to say something terrible there, but up significant injuries by the time that we next hear from Michael Carrick. So yeah, that wouldn't be ideal. But judging by the way things have gone so far this season, it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean, Riley McGree will probably be ruled out with jet lag. Um, Silvera will have probably picked up jet lag, contagious from McGree. But no, on a serious level, Crooks missed out yesterday because of a bang to his hip, apparently. So hopefully we'll have him back, because he always scores against Bristol City. So that'll be good. But honestly, don't have a clue what Middlesbrough are going to turn up. As you mentioned, our home form's a real concern, and it's starting to really frustrate me. Going to Riverside, full of optimism, and coming away with either a drab draw that feels like a loss, or just getting beat against some dross side down the bottom of the league, like QPR and Gareth Ainsworth.
Yeah,
Um,
just uh,
um, but yeah, Bristol City pose a difficult test, to be fair. Obviously we've seen them go to Coventry last week and pick up a point. They played Leeds on Friday, and I did actually watch the full game. And obviously, as mentioned earlier, talking about the parachute teams, it's sort of different levels. And Bristol City didn't have a kick all game, really. So you couldn't really gauge a whole lot from them there. But on the whole, they're quite a similar side to us. Really. Um, got a few decent players. Obviously, you mentioned Twine going to work with Manning as they did at MK Dons. Obviously, they've got players that can hurt you up front. Player that always hurts us usually is Naki Wells.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, hopefully they don't select him at the weekend. And Conway as well, decent little player. Good centre forward. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how things go, but it'll be a side that hopefully won't come to the Riverside and just sit there and just say, go on then, break us down. Because we can't, as we found out for the most part this season. If any side does that, we're just dead and buried. We can't break sides down. Um, which is
And if
really
we do manage it, we won't score the chance because we don't have a recognised
yeah,
striker.
yeah, and we'll probably concede a 40-yard worldy, or our goalkeeper will just throw the ball in the back of the net anyway. So yeah,
With
it's
an XG of -1.4.
yeah, so it's one of them things really, but yeah, um, really sort of interesting to see how the game goes. But I'm quite pleased that it's hopefully not going to be against a side that just sits there. They're hopefully going to come here and try and win the game. So that makes me a little bit more optimistic to watch a good game of football rather than Rotherham's hoofball, John Hugill, just awful.
Right. I mean, I've said not talk about QPR, and we definitely not talk about that.
Yeah.
That
So
is, yeah, that is
anyway,
not
um, apart from apart from Bristol City and going through the transfers and going through Sunderland and Josh Coburn and everything else, well done to Sunderland on their 1-1 win. Um, Fair play to them for finally getting a result at the Riverside. I genuinely can't remember the last time that they did. Um,
well. They did, but it was in extra time, and that probably was what 2012.
2011, 2012, so about
Yeah.
12 years ago. So I was,
Well,
I was,
it took them extra time as well, didn't it? So
it did. And they were in the Premier League playing against Scottish Borough. So I was actually 10 years old and I'm now 22, 23 this year. The last time they scored a goal at the Riverside. Um, so yeah, honestly, fair play to them for finally doing something at our place. Um, long may Beale continue. So uh yeah, fair play to them. Um, just lastly, a bit of a strange one that I wanted to put in earlier, on our quest for the playoffs and the sort of the quest of every side in this little pack for the playoffs. Honestly, would you actually want to be in it? Because the likelihood is we'd play the team that comes third over 2 games, and I honestly couldn't think of
Southampton or
I
Ipswich.
couldn't I couldn't think of anything worse than go to play Leeds over 2 legs and they just roll us over and do whatever they like for
Nathan,
the 2 games.
I think you're forgetting that by the time that we are eventually in the playoffs, we'll have a fully fit Latilaf that's on the verge of getting his 20th of the season. Marcus Force will be in triple figures by then. Riley McGree will be dancing around the final third, producing magic. And, well, the rest of the team will just be perfect, really. Senny will be back. Ralph van den Berg will be worth 100 million by the time we're in there. So yeah, there's so many reasons to be positive, really, Nathan. And yeah, bring it on if we make them. If not, well, it's a shame for the other teams, I guess, because it would have been embarrassing for them. Yeah, why not end the podcast on some positivity? I think it's needed after. I think it's fair to say a little bit of disappointment throughout this one. But yeah, if you have enjoyed this podcast, despite the result and the lack of a 9, then by all means do rate and review if you're listening on audio platforms, and do like and subscribe if you're watching via YouTube. We will be back next week after Bristol City, after, please, Middlesbrough, a win at the Riverside Stadium, because it feels like a lifetime ago since we've won in the league there. But yes, Nathan, thank you ever so much for your time as well, as always. And that has been another episode of the Boropolis podcast. And we will see you again, hopefully a little bit cheerier next week.